person. I will convene this meeting of the Board of County Commissioners. Today is June 7th, 2022, and we will move forward with the meeting. Mr. Rickoff, welcome today. Mr. Rickoff will be replacing Mr. Mokrahysky as Executive Director of Food for Lane County. That's the wrong term. But, and I would like to state that Commissioner Burney is with us remote today. Welcome, Commissioner Burney.
Thank you very much, Chair. You don't know how much I wish I were there in person with you all.
That is a shared sentiment. Then, Mr. Rickoff, any adjustments to the agenda?
Your Father, there are no adjustments to the agenda.
Perfect. And any emergency business from the board or from the?
To the best of my knowledge, there is none.
Then we'll move into public comments directly. Today we'll be entertaining public comments both in person and virtually. Speakers will be called in the order they sign up, limited to 3 minutes per public comment. Speakers present in Harris Hall will be taken first, followed by Ms. Jones managing the queue of anyone who signed up virtually. If the number wishing to testify exceeds 10 speakers, additional speakers may be allowed if the chair determines time permits. We'll move directly forward. You'll have 3 minutes. When I call your name, if you're in person, please step to the mic, state your full name and your place of residence for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak once you approach the mic. We'll move directly, Ms. Jones, into public comment. First person signed up today in person is Nicholas. Just Nicholas, please step to the mic and state your full name, and we'll have 3 minutes once you begin.
Hello, my name is Nicholas Anselmo. I live in Eugene, Oregon. I wanted to ask if any of the 4J board members have called any of you racist or white supremacists, as none of you are a person of color. And I'm wondering if you will be hosting any Juneteenth events this Juneteenth where vendors of people of color are only welcome. I really wouldn't want us to digress to the 1960s where Martin Luther King said, we only judge people based upon their character and not the color of their skin. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anselmo. Ms. Jones, that concludes public testimony from in-person testimonials. Please continue with the online queue. How many people do we have in the queue?
Thank you, Chair Farr. I see 2 people have registered for public comment, but I only see 1 hand up. So if you have registered for public comment and you would like to speak during public comment, please raise your virtual hand up. 1 comment just went away. So we have 1 person, Mr. David Eichel. David, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment. David, I show you're self-muted. David, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but you are self-muted, so we cannot hear you.
Hello?
There we go.
Okay, I'll be brief. I furnished you with some documentation. This does literally represent years worth of work, so I hope you'll invest a little time in it. Lane County tax dollars are being used to fund academic and historical frauds. I hope you will take seriously these documents I provided you. I'm beginning to provide them to every school district and municipal government in Lane County. What has happened and is happening will become known to the public. I've been in contact with some of the families of some of the truly wonderful people who have been victimized by the U of O President Michael Schill, the Oregon Black Pioneers in the Lane County Historical Society. As you can well imagine, these families are very upset by this misrepresentation of their ancestors. Unfortunately, what I've been uncovering is only the tip of the iceberg of misconduct. Just for one example, in one of the most prominent places of the Knight Library, there was a very prominent display which informed people that in the 1890s, there were laws in effect in the state of Oregon that prevented non-white U.S. citizens from living here. I mean, this is just ridiculous. I mean, it's disgusting. Anyway, I won't take any more of your time, but I will continue to be in contact, and I am available to you for any questions or supplementary information if you have any. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Eichel. Ms. Jones.
Thank you for your public comments. I do show that Harry Sanger has just joined the meeting. Mr. Sanger, if you would like to give public comment, I will unmute your microphone right now. You may begin your public comment. I don't see your hand up, so I'm not sure you want to speak, but I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your comment if you'd like. You are self-muted, Mr. Sanger. I'm going to maybe assume that you are just monitoring. Oh, there you go. Would you like to give public comment, Mr. Sanger?
I do not have a comment today. I'd like to thank the commissioners for the addition of the 1 and 2 recycling, I guess, and wish you a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanger. Chair Farr, at this time, we have no one else signed up for public comment, so I will return the meeting to you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Ms. Rickoff will continue with the Commissioner's response to public comments and or other issues and remonstrances. And I'll look around me for the queue. Then seeing none, I will just state that for anyone who may be paying attention, next Tuesday, the board meeting, we will not be meeting on Tuesday afternoon in deference to and in order to attend the services for former Sheriff Tom Turner, which will take place at the fairgrounds. Very somber affair. No further comments from the board?
Excuse me, Chair Farr. It will take place at the First Baptist Church, 3550. I have it written down here, Fox Meadow Road. But thank you. Yes, you are correct at 1 p.m.
Thank you. The First Baptist Church, very big parking lot there.
Yes, lots of space, and I think we're going to need it. I think we will draw from law enforcement colleagues, friends, and family throughout the region. We're planning to attend.
And I believe there's going to be a procession from Florence to Eugene that day also.
Sir.
Very good. And we all know that former Sheriff Turner served until his passing as the chief of police for the city of Florence. Very good. Moving directly along to the consent calendar. We have before us a consent calendar for June 7, 2022. Everything that's on the consent calendar will be passed as a single motion. Anything that had been of interest or would have necessary separate discussion would have been pulled from the calendar before this point in time. So we have the consent calendar. If you wish to view the material on the consent calendar, just go to our website, go to today's agenda and click on view material. You'll see the entire packet that the Board of County Commissioners has reviewed. So we have the consent calendar. Do I have a motion?
Chair, I'll move passage of the consent calendar for June 7th, 2022.
Second.
Moved by Vice Chair Krieger and seconded, I am sorry, Commissioner Burney, seconded by Commissioner Buck. Any discussion to the motion? I see none, then I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Passes unanimously. Moving down the agenda, we have County Council. Mr. Dingle, are you with us today for announcements? I understand there are not. Mr.
Dingle has computer difficulties right now.
Then Ms. Jones, we keep me alerted and we'll move back to Mr. Dingle later in the meeting if he does need to make any announcements. And I believe there may be a couple from him. We'll move along to administration announcements. Mr. Rickoff, today you are our administrator.
Chair Farr, yes, I am. And just a couple quick announcements. As you mentioned, Steve Mokryski is on well-deserved TM, hoping he is resting and enjoying himself with his family. I was going to mention again, memorial service for retired Sheriff Tom Turner. Thank you for doing that. That is next Tuesday at 1 p.m. At the First Baptist Church. One more update on the election. The last day for an elector to resolve an unsigned ballot envelope or a challenge signature is today, the 7th by 5 p.m. Any elector with a discrepancy has already been notified by letter and been provided instructions on how to resolve the issue. Updated results will be posted by 5 p.m. Thursday, the 9th. The election is expected to be certified no later than Monday, June 13th. The final work after certification includes completion of the required administrative hand count, where state selected ballots have been hand tallied and compared to certified results, mailing of precinct committee persons' certificates of election, and the final reporting requirements to the state elections division. Chair Farr, that is all I have for you this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Rickoff. Any questions or comments for Mr. Rickoff? I see none. Though. Let's move along to item 7A, which is a report on the Legislative Committee. Legislative Committee update. And Mr. Rickoff, I'll let you introduce the panel, which will consist of.
We will have Alex Kyler join us, our Intergovernmental Relations Manager, and I have to admit, it feels like old home week having a chance to sit next to Alex.
Welcome, Mr. Kyler.
Good to see you. Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Good to see you. Alex Kyler, the Lane County Intergovernmental Relations Manager. I think you have a packet in front of you that outlines the item today. We were able to hold a legislative committee meeting on April 28th. We had a number of items on the agenda. That was a virtual meeting. And today there's a report back. As usual, at the legislative committee meeting, one of the priority functions that we do is to examine the principles and priorities document. That document is a very dynamic document, and it continues to provide information and authority once the board has adopted it for the staff to work on a variety of legislative issues. So it's constantly, we're sort of taking things off the list and we're adding new things to the list. I did want to just ensure that the board did know that when you last approved that document, which was prior to the short session of the legislature, was on January 4th, included in that motion that you did was a suite of federal priorities, because we had anticipated back then that we would be needing to queue up very quickly or pivot from the end of the short session to a trip to Washington, D.C., the annual United Front trip. So we did have a number of federal priorities that the board did approve on January 4th. And at least it was my sense that when we went to DC, we actually had a great deal of fidelity to that list, and that the United Front book, which became the topic of some discussion at the board after the Washington, DC meeting, did include the issues that the board had approved at the January 4th meeting. So really trying to make sure that this document has both our state and federal priorities. And these issues are constantly moving, and that's why we really like to make sure that we're updating this as much as possible. I think you'll see moving forward at likely the next legislative committee meeting that we will do more work to really integrate your recently adopted strategic plan into the principles and priorities document, so that it's very clear that this document doesn't really stray very far from the strategic document, and vice versa, that we're really trying to make sure that we're moving forward the board's priorities at the legislative front as they're, to the extent that they're expressed in the strategic plan. So just to get into the packet a little bit here, we did, you'll see I did sort of put in the changes that we're adding. So there were a number of new principles that we're suggesting are in the document that are state focused. As you recall, we after the holiday farm fire, we sort of added a section all about wildfire issues because it was such a focus for both the 21 and 22 sessions of the legislature. We're not exactly sure what will happen in the 23 session with respect to the wildfire committees that Senate and House leadership stood up, and probably largely depend on what happens in the coming fire season, tell you the truth. And we're seeing changes in both the House leadership and Senate leadership. We've got a brand new speaker and a yet to be determined Senate president. And so it will really be up to those leaders about whether or not they want to form up another wildfire committee. I think at this point in time, our hope is that they do, that those wildfire committees have been exceedingly important for our efforts there. I also did We did discuss some specific priorities. So priorities, principles are sort of general guiding to help us as we negotiate with other partners through these legislative processes so that we can be nimble in responding to whether it's a member or a peer organization that makes an inquiry about what our position is on a certain issue. But the priorities are actually where the board is saying, go ahead and go get a bill written if you can, get it introduced if you can, lobby it as you're able to, and let's see if we can get it to the governor's desk. So we did add several new priorities for the 23 session of the Oregon legislature. And again, this is not the final effort with respect to the 23 session. We will have another, at least one more legislative committee meeting to hone this list, but in the interim, we're already starting to work on these kinds of issues. I think the board knows there's a legislative conference of the Association of Oregon Counties coming up, and by having your approval of this document sort of gives me a lot more leeway to work with my colleagues and members who might become potential sponsors of legislation to start getting things into the queue for the 23 session. We talked a little bit about some federal issues that have bubbled up. Obviously, there's been a lot more even since the meeting. And then we provided a summary of the United Front trip that I've also included as an attachment in your memo here today. I will say that the lead up to the United Front trip this year was sort of non-traditional. I mean, we've gone for 2 years without being in DC. This year we had some changes in who was going to go on that trip right up to the last minute. Some of the meetings were in the offices of Smith, Dawson, and Andrews via a screen, much like this setting. There were some that were in agencies. There were some that were in coffee shops. I mean, it was a very dynamic situation, obviously, because COVID was still present in DC, and we were dealing with that. I will say that it was a very good trip. There was a lot of really good things that came out of the trip, not the least of which is that we were experiencing success in the federal fiscal year 22 congressionally directed spending notices. The president did sign the federal fiscal year 22 budget back in March, and we had several projects that were named Lane County for specific funding. When we were in DC this time, we were starting to talk about the federal fiscal year 23 projects. And I'm delighted to say that the 3 projects that we put forward were all adopted by Representative Peter DeFazio, Senator Ron Wyden, and Senator Jeff Merkley. So that first hurdle of getting them to put their name onto our projects has been accomplished. So that was part of the trip. Typically has been part of the trip when we've gone back to DC, going way back from when congressionally directed spending was a normal part of operations. There was about a 12-year hiatus there, and now we're back into year 2 of that. And again, so far so good with respect to the FY23 budget year. So I will also just touch on the fact that we did have an agenda item at the legislative committee to talk about single payer healthcare. There was some work by community advocates to ask the county to take a position on single payer healthcare. The committee did report back. One of the principles that we talk about in this document is trying to make sure that we focus our efforts on things that have county operations implications. So we don't necessarily stray into community-wide discussions. And so we were really trying to focus on where we provide employee healthcare through our benefit package, and where we provide direct healthcare services through the federally qualified health center system. So we really tried to focus on that. That's a pretty dynamic environment of itself. There are several bills in Congress that have been introduced, not necessarily moving, but have been introduced. And there's a task force in Salem that is working through some issues not that necessarily focus on, for example, the federally qualified healthcare system. So it's not a perfect fit there, but we did discuss that issue at least for a few minutes in the committee, and did not take any action with respect to that with respect to that issue. So I think I'll stop there and see if there's any questions. Again, there is an order in the packet, and it would essentially adopt the amended version, which is in the packet, and the yellow highlighted is the new language. And if there's strike through, that's the language we're getting. This would be then the document that I would be able to use and staff would be able to use moving forward, at least until the next amendment in front of you.
Mr. Kyler, thanks very much. I'll take a moment to just say thank you for your extended work. The breadth of your work is really quite impressive. You stand out in meetings quite frequently as kind of the stabilizer of the discussion, whether it be Mental Health Advisory Committee, whether it be MPC. You are equally adept at making presentations and settling people's concerns. I appreciate that. I'll look to the queue. Questions or comments for Mr. Trigger? And I see Commissioner Burney.
Thank you, Chair. Again, Mr. Kyler, my regrets not being there in person. My recollection, correct me if I'm wrong, was that I forwarded a request by a group, Healthcare for All Oregonians. They provided a proclamation which was too specific in our discussion. And my understanding was that we were going to look at putting a watch on all state legislation that related to providing health care for all Oregonians. And I don't, either A, I misunderstood our discussion at that meeting, and or B, it's not here for some reason. So could you clarify that for me? Because I thought we were at least as a county going to put that on our watch list or whatever that category is called. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. Chair Farr, the document in front of you, the principles and priorities document, doesn't necessarily provide for monitoring, I guess. We have taken, the county has typically taken positions on existing legislation, which include either support, oppose, or monitor. There's not, I think that this document is more about the support and oppose kind of notions, and not necessarily the monitor position. This obviously is, as I said, a very dynamic situation with respect to single payer healthcare. There is a task force. There may be legislation in 23. Once we see that legislation, I think we will have a much better sense of where the county could or should be on that. And the legislative committee, I think, can easily take that issue up once we
see. No problem. I'm done. But it was my recollection that that's not correct, that we were going to monitor. And as my recollection was that what was requested was way too specific. The board wasn't ready for a resolution. It was a dynamic environment, and therefore it is in our interest, at least to propose from the legislative committee to the board, that we would monitor legislation that did relate to that. So I'm not going to go back and forth, Mr. Kyler. I'm just saying maybe I'm wrong, but that was my recollection.
And Mr. Kyler, Commissioner Burney is the other member from the board of that legislative committee. I think Commissioner Burney accurately recalls the discussion. My understanding, as we monitor, quite often we wait for a bill to begin to materialize before we actually start monitoring. So what we're doing right now is monitoring what is going to be the upcoming session, where nothing has quite materialized yet. And we have a brand new, of course, a brand new legislature that is going to be elected in November, including a brand new governor that will be elected in November. So I think, Commissioner Burney, your watchful eye on this and mine also will make certain that the monitoring does occur.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
And I see a very serious look on Mr. Kyler's face too. So thank you. Further discussion? Looks like we don't have a lot to say, Alex. If for the people watching in public, watching the public, if you click on the view agenda item for this particular item, you go down, you look at the highlights in yellow, and that is the changes to the document that Mr. Kyler's talked about. Very easy to pick out, very easy to read. So thank you, Mr. Kyler, for that. So then we will move along to item 7B, which is a matter of presenting the third quarter financial report.
Chair, we do have an order in front
We
of us.
do have an order in front of us.
And I will move passage of order 22-06-07-07 in the matter of adopting recommendations of the Lane County Legislative Committee.
Vice Chair Trieger has moved order 22-06-0707. Do I have a second?
Waiting for Commissioner Burney.
Moved by Vice Chair Trieger, seconded by Commissioner Burney. Order 22-06-0707. Discussion to the motion. Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you. So I won't go item by item, but I voted no the last time the legislative priorities came up, and I'm going to be voting no again because it does include some items I just can't agree with. I will say we need to pay close attention to the funding for the Community Corrections Act, the impacts grants, treatment courts, and a lot of public safety work, JRI. That system right now is projected to take a real dollar cut of about 20%. And it was underfunded to start with. The legislature has not followed the time studies. So we were already overloaded in caseloads, and particularly in parole and probation. And a reduction in the number of people under supervision does not mean a reduction in staff for us or cost. At the same time, we're expected to do much more treatment of people under supervision, and counseling and getting these people whole and preventing recidivism. We have to pay attention to those budgets. And at a couple $100 million out of the billions in the state budget, they ought to be funding these things fully. And it's such an important piece of public safety to get these people whole again and productive members of society. For me, that bullet item in there, I hate voting no because that bullet item's in the list, but there are things in there I just can't agree with.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozievich. And Ms. Kyler, do you want to respond on that specific item?
Sure. Commissioner Bozievich, Chair Farr, the issue that Commissioner Bozievich brings up, I think, is indicative of the larger budgetary process that we'll be going into in the state. We're right in the situation now where agencies are evolving what are called their agency request budgets. Those go to the governor, where she will take those agency request budgets and essentially build what is referred to as a governor's recommended budget to the Oregon legislature. Then the Oregon legislature will work through that during the 23 session and ultimately pass their legislatively approved budget. We, in 2018, we actually the Board of County Commissioners made a series of recommendations to the governor approximately in October, where the board really highlighted some of the specific funds that we were concerned about and some of the specific items in agency request budgets. I'm really hoping we're going to be able to do that again this year. We were sort of sidelined by wildfire and COVID issues in the last biennium, but I think it's a really good opportunity for the board to be very aware of what's happening with the state proposed budget, and then ensuring that the governor's office know that we're actually engaged and watching that. Now, obviously, this year is going to be a little bit different, where this governor will not be in the Capitol building to advocate for her budget. It will be a new governor, so it'll be a very interesting year. Nonetheless, there are a number of issues that we've typically commented on: CAFA for the assessor, CCA and JRI, obviously huge one. There's some other veteran stuff that staff have been made me aware of. So I think we will be coming back with that kind of letter, and we will have that opportunity to really raise that issue of certain budgetary streams. So I look forward to bringing you that material at a timely time.
Chair Farr, Commissioner Bozovich, as Commissioner Bozovich and Alex Kyler have said in the past, the fact that we are working to get those out of the justice system depends on a model that only funds folks involved in the justice system defies logic. And it is a model, a funding model that is broken, and we have to have this fixed.
Mr. Bozovich, thank you for highlighting that particular item. Thanks for the discussion. You know, at least every 8 years, we have a situation where the governor writes a budget that the governor doesn't get to advocate for. Sometimes every 4 years, and every now and then here in Oregon, every 2 years, every now and then. But thanks for that. Commissioner Bozovich, anything further?
No.
Then further discussion to the motion. I see none. We have before us order number 220607-07 in the matter of adopting recommendations of the Lane County Legislative Committee, moved by Commissioner Trieger, by Vice Chair Trieger, seconded by Commissioner Burney. I will call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Passes 4-1 with Commissioner Bozovich opposed.
Chair Farr, before we move on, we received some news this past week that Alex would like to share.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Farr. As you know, we've been working with the firm of Smith, Dawson, Andrews for a number of years on our federal priorities. They're based in Washington, D.C. There were 3 principals to that firm that formed it up after a tenure in the Department of Transportation. And so that firm has really provided a lot of focus on transportation related issues, and their lead on airport, particularly airport work, a man by the name of Greg Andrews, passed away on Sunday. We got news after a very short illness. Greg didn't necessarily come to Lane County during the firm's annual visit here, but he did work with us quite a bit in DC, helped move us around from meeting to meeting and be present there. And I think some of you may have worked directly with Greg, but a very, very short illness, and we got the news that he passed on Sunday morning. So I've sent a card to Jim Smith. He's now the remaining principal of the firm, but he's lost now 2 partners, and no doubt that the firm will continue to provide us really valuable work. They've been super to work with and very effective in our efforts, but I did want you to be aware of the passing of Greg Andrews.
And thank you, Mr. Kyler, for carrying the condolences of the entire Board of County Commissioners.
Finally, I'd just like to add that, so now that you've adopted this, you'll remember one of the issues that we've sort of been dealing with for a number of years at both the state and federal front is an issue with the FQHC and the potential liability that we're exposed to when people are court ordered into care. The board will recall that we've also been sort of the mover on bringing that issue to the attention of the National Association of Counties through the annual resolution process. My understanding is that the Association of Oregon Counties is going to adopt a suite of resolutions at their legislative conference. And so by putting this into the priority list, as you did just now, I hope you feel comfortable that I move that issue back into that milieu and that process that AOC will be leading.
And that is the conference in Hermiston?
Yes.
Are you planning to be in
I'm planning
personal
to be
attendance?
there.
Excellent. And the other commissioners may well indeed be at that meeting also.
We would, except for we have a board. That's one problem with that
little tiny
day.
thing.
But I will make sure that we've brought that issue through NACO before, so I think it's fairly standard. But making sure that you had this today will, I think, take care of that detail.
Excellent. Vice Chair.
Thank you. I do have one quick question. Are there legislative days scheduled this month or not until?
They were last week.
They were last week.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and Commissioner Buck actually testified at the Wildfire Committee. And again, that committee has been highly effective for us. And we did, we're really hoping that it lasts into the 23 session, but we'll have to see.
Do
Do we know, is November the next scheduled, or is there a summer?
I think
another week in
September.
August, September? Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, and I can endeavor to do a better job making sure you're aware of what's coming down the pike at those days. They did have a pretty robust schedule, culminated with the emergency board convening as well and making a number of investments, approving grants, those sorts of things.
Thank you.
And that was during Memorial Day week.
Chair.
Yes.
Yeah.
Commissioner Bozeman, please.
I will say I want to appreciate the e-board in the 100 million that they put towards public defenders. We have a real crisis in Oregon around public defenders, and it's part of that entire system of trying to divert people. If they can't get assigned defense, we can't get them in front of a judge to be moved into a downward departure program or some other diversion. And quite often, sometimes the charges get dropped because of a lack of defense, and they just get released back out in the community with no treatment or anything, and reoffend and come back with higher charges on them. And so that was a very important thing that e-board did, was to make that investment in public defenders. It's part of trying to keep that system that has funding from so many different pots whole. That is our criminal justice and our restorative justice system.
An integral part of the stresses on first responders in Lane County and all other counties in Oregon. Mr. Kelly, thank you very much for the report and the extended report. Mr. Rickoff, anything further on this item?
No, sir.
Then we will move along to, excuse me, item 7B, which is a discussion in the matter of presenting the third quarter fiscal year 21-22 financial report. And Mr. Rickoff, today I believe we have Ms. Moody on the panel. Mr. Rickoff, to you.
Yes, our budget and financial planning manager, you could probably say everyone's best friend when it comes to the financial stewardship at the county. So happy to have Christine with us today.
Thank you, Chair Farr, Commissioners. So as mentioned, bringing to you the third quarter report, which ended March 31st. So slight delay in the timing. But the purpose of this report is to report to you how our actual expenditures are comparing to our budget in the current year, alert you of any concerns that we might have. And then we typically also include some economic information. As you know, most of our conversation usually is around that economic information, but I want to talk a little more about the budget to actuals this year as compared to some other quarters. But first, maybe just to highlight some of the economic information that won't be a surprise to anyone, as we're all hearing. The CPI over the last 12 months is very high. I'm looking at the executive summary too, if you're following along, but the last 12 months in the West region, 7.8% CPI. We also highlight for you the housing prices. Home sales over the last 12 months have increased 16.2% in Lane County. The average median is about 15%. So that puts our average home sales in Lane County in March 2022 at $459,000 compared to a year ago. Unemployment has gone back down after the spike with COVID. So we are seeing that return to levels that we saw prior to the pandemic begin. But still, those cost of living and items are something to highlight for us, of course. The pieces that I'll just talk about briefly on the expenditure tracking. We don't have any major concerns, so we are tracking according to our budget. You'll see that the specific report you have is for the general fund. It's positive, well within budget. We do have just the overall tracking of the a lot of one-time money coming into the county budget that you've heard about through the budget process. So a lot of federal and state funds specifically related to the pandemic, some of it related to the holiday farm fire. Sometimes we see delays in receipt of those funds. So that's the biggest thing that we watch, is to make sure that our cash flow is good in all of our funds. So no major concerns to bring up to you now, but we're continuing to watch that as we get close to the end of the fiscal year. June 30th is a date that we need to make sure that we've received as much as we're spending in every fund. So with that, I think I'm open for questions if there's anything we want to dive into more.
Thank you, Ms. Moody. I'll open the queue for questions. I'll look to Commissioner Burney, see none. No questions at this point, but you raised a flag that we continue to raise, and that is the cost of housing in Lane County. As the median cost of the average cost of single family units rises, rents rise with them. That's an economic fact, and it does, and we're seeing that across the board. Consequently, people who live and work in Lane County are finding it more and more difficult to own or rent a place to live in Lane County, which absolutely adds to the continuing escalation of homelessness in Lane County. It's not a false projection to say that as we are unable to provide more front doors, then we're making it more difficult for people to stay inside of safe places to sleep at night. So thank you, Ms. Moody. Sorry to bring that up, but you mentioned it, and it is something that this board cares deeply about. Commissioner Trieger, Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I think just your comments just spurred me to mention as well. It is an obvious connection, but I think also what we see is more and more households stressed and needing other services that we provide that seem like a less direct link between lack of housing, lack of affordable housing, ridiculously low vacancy rate when it comes to, I mean, even if people could afford the rentals that are available, they're so precious few. I think we just heard yesterday a 1.3% vacancy rate at the Housing Policy Board here in the city of Eugene. And we heard at previous meetings, I think when Director Gray was here, that there are people who are getting job offers from the county who can't, who are relocating and can't find a place to live and have to waive off the job offer. So I think the ripple effects, the evident direct connection that you mentioned, Chair Farr, is absolutely worth calling out. But I don't know if it's quantifiable, but I would be really curious over time to get a sense of the other ways in which the safety net programs that Lane County provides are being strained as a result of, or that are connected to, the current housing market and housing prices. More and more people are going to need things to backfill: energy assistance, rent assistance, perhaps other kinds of healthcare services, and so on. So I just think it's something for us, big picture, to be aware of, that it's absolutely directly tied to housing issues, but those ancillary impacts on families and the safety net services that we provide. If there's any way to quantify and think about bringing us some of that information in the future, that would be really helpful.
Thank you, Commissioner Trieger. Chair Farr.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
So I will just note also that I mentioned a lot of the one-time money coming from the federal and state resources. There is a large amount of that that's related to rental assistance and non-congregate sheltering. Of course, that is a lot of COVID-related money. So we will be watching for, as those funding sources stop, the need is not anticipated to stop at the same time. So I do think you will hear more from that in that service area for sure.
Thank you, and thank you for that discussion. And I will state that we received a report on this condition of housing and the pipeline for new housing, new front doors in Lane County. This seemed far too rosy for what we actually see on the street. So we need to keep our eyes alert and aware and do every single thing that we can. Commissioner Burney.
Thank you very much, Chair. I don't know how you can keep track of me being remote, so thank you very much. We bemoan this issue. We describe this issue. My understanding is there are communities in Oregon that have precluded the purchase of vacation homes or not vacation homes, but rental homes, so that more local people can have a shot at a place to live. My understanding is that churches and school districts and even the county have property that can be either zoned or rezoned, as we're looking at missing middle, and provided so that we can start offsetting some of these costs. My understanding is that there are now in the news every day direct relationships between the very costs Commissioner Trieger was discussing: homelessness, drug abuse, inability to access services. This is such a vicious downward spiral that we are experiencing. It is almost adding insult to injury, that the average price of a home in this area is $459,000. I think that demonstrates, when one looks at, and I don't have this data, but when one looks at the average income in this area, that houses are not affordable. In some markets, corporate REITs, which stands for Real Estate Investment Trusts, are purchasing up single family homes at the level of 30% of all of those homes on the market. This is an issue I think we can start tackling a little more directly, and I look forward to those discussions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. Further discussion? I see none. Then Ms. Moody, thank you. You got a little bit more than you called for, but this is something that each member of this board talks about very frequently, and it really is a concern. You know, we see people moving here. Speaking a little bit from personal experience, you sell a house in Ohio, move to a good job in Lane County, and you cannot find a place to live. You know, so why do, if we want increased talent in our community, people who don't possess the talent who already live here, people moving back, for instance, from college, they want to come back and live where they went to high school. They can't do it, you know, because it's very difficult to find a place to live. So we'll continue this discussion next week. We have a good presentation next week on housing. So very good. Thank you, Ms. Moody. Ms. Rickard.
Chair Farr, just a reminder, this afternoon we will have the Human Services Division with us to talk about the unhoused and how interconnected all of this is. So it will be daily fare for you, I'm afraid, for some time.
Don't be afraid. That is, you know, it really is what we feast upon, you know, or we should, you know, it's something that we have to pay attention to, because those of us who live in a place, those of us who have a house, it's fine. If you see the cost of the house the price of the house that you live in go up, you think, wow, we're doing great. However, at what expense? You know, at the expense of the people who simply cannot put food on the table because their housing is 50, 60% of their income or more. So that's enough on that. Then we'll move directly down. Mr. Roykoff, I already gave you a room for announcements, which is item C. Do you have anything further on announcements?
I do not, but I'd be interested to see if County Council would be ready for us to revisit item 6.
Thank you for the reminder. Mr. Dingle, are you with us? I don't believe Mr. Dingle is with us, so we may readdress that later in the afternoon. This morning, that concludes our morning regular business, but we do have need for executive session this morning. And I'm going to read us into executive session. So following at the sound of my gavel, we will recess the Board of County Commissioners, enter into executive session. And you'll hear about returning for additional business of the business as I read us into executive session. The Board of County Commissioners will meet in executive session to consult with counsel regarding the rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. The executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602H, which allows the Board of County Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come back into public session should the need arise. And Mr. Rickoff, I will mention this executive session will be held in our offices, in our individual offices on a remote basis.